Hello, and welcome to Lecture 1 of Chapter 3 in Psychology of Personal Growth. In this chapter, we will extend our discussion of personality development that we began in Chapter 2. And this lecture will focus on the first 5 stages of Erickson's biopsychosocial stages. So you'll see that I have loaded a number of different charts on Erickson onto Moodle Rooms, and they are very similar in the basic stages. However, they're different in their levels of complexity. And so I've provided different views on Erickson stages in order to help us gain a better understanding of how these stages work. So this first chart, titled the Simplified Chart on Erickson, is a bare bones explanation and identifies all 8 stages by name, the age or the age range associated with each stage, as well as the virtue or the core value Erickson identified in each stage, and then the crisis, the task, or the challenge that he believes we face at each of these particular stages according to our biological age and what we experience socially. So this first chart lays some basic groundwork. The next chart, which identifies the first 5 stages, is courtesy of Joe Keegan. And you'll notice this chart has a little more explanation in each section. And you'll notice some variations in these age ranges. And since we know age and development are fluid ideas, it's very hard to cut an age off 0 to 12 months versus 0 to 18 months, considering infants develop at various levels. However, Erickson was able to zero in and say within these ranges you will see this type of development. So this chart can be very helpful in that it's simple and yet has a little more explanation for each of the stages. The one we will look at for this lecture adds a little more complexity and also includes the corresponding Freudian psychosexual stage that matches up in age and development with Erickson's stages. Now, Erickson was a student of Freud and studied Freud extensively, but expanded on Freud's ideas to include the social aspects of our environment and how those affect our development. So Erickson begins with the core challenge, and so this is the infancy stage. Okay, here's the life stage here. And the core challenge in the infancy stage, and you'll see this as 0 to 1 year, 0 to 18 months, and the trust versus mistrust is really dependent on the reliability and the quality and quantity of the care given to the infant when it's needed. So this is being comforted, nurturing, being fed, allowed to sleep. And so if the child is cared for in a reliable way and they are aware that their needs are being met and taken care of, then the child ideally will develop a sense of trust. On the other end of the spectrum, if the child is neglected and can't rely on the caregiver or parent to provide what is needed in terms of food and nurturing, changing diapers, all those basic needs, the infant can develop a sense of mistrust, a sense of rejection, a low self-esteem, or a sense of isolation because they're not in control of their environment and they are relying on a caregiver for that. And so this is the trust versus mistrust. And then Erickson also identified core virtues or values, or what he termed strengths that were associated with each stage. And the one in the first stage is hope and drive. But you'll see hope most frequently listed with this phase. So the second stage, which would be early childhood or the toddler phase. Erickson identifies the challenge or the crisis as being autonomy versus shame and doubt. And so autonomy happens when a toddler begins to view themselves as an individual. The infant is now able to walk and to gain independence through walking and through being able to perceive the world around them in an independent way from their caregiver or their parent. So they begin to establish control over their actions and a little bit more control over their world. And so you'll see in the toddler phase the terrible twos and the terrible threes, and that makes sense because there's this tension between relying on a caregiver for most needs and yet also having the ability to walk independently, and they want to be able to do things by themselves. And so the basic virtue associated with this stage is willpower and self-control. Now, if the child is allowed to explore and gain some independence within certain boundaries, ideally they will develop this sense of willpower and self-control. However, if they are not allowed to explore their world, or they're constantly feeling thwarted, Erickson says they may develop some what we call maladaptations, or some developmental hindrances such as impulsivity or compulsion. And so finding the balance between independence, but independence within boundaries was a key aspect of this particular stage. So the third stage that we will look at is the preschool stage. And this, you'll see these ages listed from 3 to 6, 3 to 5, 4 to 5. You'll see that age range depending on which chart you look at. And the challenge or the crisis at this phase is initiative versus guilt. And so if you think about a preschooler, they're starting to explore, they're starting to play and develop friendships with other preschoolers. And while they're not in school yet, they are starting to gain a sense of the social environment and their interaction with others. And so you'll see this sense of initiative. They're trying to initiate activity and play. And in this stage, you'll often find that preschoolers want to create worlds and have you play with them. Any of you who have younger brothers and sisters or have children of your own, or babysat or observed other children at this age, you'll see that sense of play and discovery really coming out in exploration. And so the initiative versus the guilt, if they are not allowed to explore and they're not allowed to play and they're thwarted, then what you might see are feelings of guilt about their natural impulses. There might be a sense of rigidity, or shame might be a maladaptation that you will see if the preschooler isn't allowed to explore and play in this stage. And you'll see the descriptors listed here as ruthlessness or inhibition, and those would be opposing hindrances. The fourth stage, which you'll see listed as 5 to 12 or 6 to 12, the core crises here, or the challenge, is industry versus inferiority. And if you think of children attending school in this phase, that sense of industry is them being in school and having a sense of accomplishment. And so the opposite of that is having a sense of inferiority. And this is a very critical age for um, for children. And think about that age range of 5 or 6 to 12, and how many things happen developmentally in that age range right at the time that they are being introduced to school, and many, many more playmates than they've had before. And then on top of that, you add all of the requirements that school imposes on children. And you can see how this is a critical phase for development. And so, if a child goes to school and um, finds success and experiences a sense of accomplishment, Erickson believed they would have this sense of industry. Competence is the basic virtue that he established in this phase, a method, a way of going about accomplishing their tasks and finding success in however success is being defined in that point in time. And the opposite of that, the opposite crises would be not finding success with what is being valued, let's say, in school or at home. And that's when you see a sense of inferiority. And developing skills that are valued within our schools is a key stage of development for children. And this is probably obvious to most people, and yet we don't always think about it in the context of education, especially at this point where we're seeing this big push for standardization, for more testing, and for higher stakes in each grade range and at younger and younger ages. And you can see how, while those benchmarks are well intentioned, and intended to accelerate success. At the same time, this is a critical age, and there could be an opposing result when students are given negative feedback consistently about what we're valuing in school. And so you may see feelings of inferiority or negative self-concept. You'll see children become quite unmotivated if they're met with failure in various aspects in school. And so this is a key developmental stage. As is the final stage that we'll talk about in this lecture, which is the adolescent stage or the puberty stage, where Erickson identified the crisis as identity versus role confusion. And this also is a critical stage in our development, especially in terms of personality and forming our identities. And so the ages associated here are 12 to 18, or perhaps 19, 20, 21, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the second lecture that will start with the sixth stage of development, which is the young adult stage. However, to go back to the adolescent stage to finish this discussion of Erickson, in the adolescent years, you see much more influence of peers. And so in the first 12 years or so, the family unit is really the core. The family or caregiving unit is the dominant environment, that and school. And then in the adolescent years, you will see more of an influence with romantic engagements, friends. Some adolescents have jobs, more of a social life or lack thereof that starts to really influence children at this age or adolescents at this age. And they're really starting to explore their sense of identity. Who are they? Independent from their parents, their siblings. And so this is why there is so much tension within those adolescent years. And the basic virtue or strength associated with this stage in terms of Erickson is fidelity and devotion, and competing loyalties, loyalties to friends, loyalties to families, really trying to figure out what is it that makes up the core personality in these ages. And so you can see Erickson really encapsulated many elements of what makes up our personality within these first 5 stages. We will continue on with our discussion of Erickson and add another psychologist viewpoint, that of Dr. Jeffrey Arnett, as we move into Lecture 2, beginning with the 6th stage. Thank you.